I came to after surgery completely alone. The nurse leaned over me and said, "Your children left. They said the parking was too expensive." I broke down in tears. A moment later, a tall man in a suit stepped into the room and gently took my hand. "Mrs. Davis, you don't remember me, but you bought my lunch every day in 3rd grade." He wasn't just some visitor. He was the owner of the hospital. And what he did next changed everything. I'm glad you're here with me. Stay with my story until the end and write the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far my story travels. The fluorescent lights above my bed buzzed with that cold, endless hum that somehow makes you feel even more isolated. I blinked slowly, my throat dry and raspy, trying to read the clock on the stark white wall. 3:27 p.m. The anesthesia still wrapped everything in a soft blur, but one thing cut through the fog with painful clarity: the silence. My name is Adrienne Davis, and I'm 64 years old. 3 hours earlier, I'd had what my cardiologist confidently called a routine procedure to clear a blocked artery. Nothing major, he'd said. Still, when your heart is involved and you're in your 60s, nothing feels routine. I'd asked my 3 children to be there when I woke up. David, my eldest at 38, promised he'd take the day off from his accounting job. Sarah, 35 and once again between jobs, said she'd show up with flowers. Michael, my baby at 32, had rolled his eyes but mumbled that he'd come after his sales calls. The room smelled sharply of disinfectant and something else I couldn't name. Maybe fear, maybe disappointment. The monitors beside me beeped in steady rhythm, tracking my heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, everything the doctors cared about. But there was no machine measuring the heavy emptiness spreading through my chest, a pain that had nothing to do with surgery or arteries. I turned my head toward the window, flinching as the IV line tugged at my skin and sent a sharp ache down my neck. Outside, the Seattle sky was its usual dull gray, hinting at rain that might or might not come. Cars drifted through the hospital parking lot, people stepping out, going in, visiting their loved ones. Where were mine? "Mrs. Davis?" A voice cut through the fog of confusion and rising panic. I turned my head and saw a young nurse with kind eyes and strawberry blonde hair pulled into a ponytail. Her scrubs were covered in cheerful cartoon cats, jarringly bright in such a sterile room. "Yes," I croaked. My voice came out hoarse and faint, my throat still raw from the breathing tube. She moved closer with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are you feeling? Any pain? Nausea?" I gave a small shake of my head. Where are my children? Did they leave a message?" Her smile faltered. She glanced down at the tablet in her hand, then back up at me, her expression tightening with discomfort. "Well, they were here earlier, in the waiting room during your surgery, and—" She hesitated. In that pause, the beeping of my heart monitor sped up. "They left about an hour ago," she finally said. "The gentleman at the front desk mentioned it." She stopped again, clearly trying to find a softer way to say the rest. "Just tell me," I said, my voice stronger now, even as my hands began to tremble. "He said they mentioned the parking fees were getting too expensive and they'd check on you later." The words slammed into me like a physical punch. Parking fees too expensive. I stared at her, convinced I'd misheard. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Her cheeks flushed pink. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Davis. I probably shouldn't have repeated that. I'm sure they'll come back. People sometimes just need to take care of things, you know? Get some air, grab a bite to eat." Her voice faded because we both knew she was trying to justify something that couldn't be justified. My children, the 3 people I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for my entire life, had left me alone after heart surgery because they didn't want to pay for parking. The tears came without warning. Not quiet, graceful tears, but hard, shuddering sobs that tore out of me like I was a child again. The kind of crying that comes from a heart breaking in ways no doctor can see on a scan. The nurse grabbed the box of tissues from my bedside and held it out, her face full of sympathy and awkward guilt. "Mrs. Davis, please try not to get too upset. Your heart needs to rest," she said softly. "Can I call someone else for you?" Another relative? A friend? I couldn't answer. I couldn't stop crying long enough to form words. I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that I was 64 years old, recovering from heart surgery, and my own children had walked away over parking that probably cost no more than $20 or $30. Through my sobs, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, steady, confident steps that paused right outside my door. The nurse looked up, her posture shifting into professional alertness. "Excuse me," a deep, gentle voice said from the doorway. "Is this Mrs. Adrienne Davis?" I dragged my hand across my face, trying to wipe away enough tears to see. A tall man stood there, framed by the door. He wore an immaculate dark suit that fit him perfectly. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes behind wire-rim glasses. Everything about him, his posture, the way he carried himself, the leather briefcase in his hand, radiated authority and success. The nurse straightened. "Yes, but visiting hours." "It's all right," he said quietly as he stepped inside. His presence filled the room in a calm, steady way rather than a forceful one. "Mrs. Davis, my name is Malcolm Chen. You don't remember me, but—" He paused, his voice catching slightly. "You paid for my lunch every day when I was in 3rd grade." I blinked at him, confusion slicing through my grief. 3rd grade? That would have been when I was 16, working at Franklin Elementary as a teacher's aide to help my family with money. But I couldn't place his face. I couldn't reach back far enough through the years to find him in my memories. He seemed to understand. He moved a little closer to the bed, his hands folded respectfully in front of him. "Mrs. Davis, you helped so many children over the years. I don't expect you to remember all of us," he said softly. "But I remember you. You saved my life." The nurse looked between us, unsure of what was happening, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Sir, if you're not immediate family, then—" the nurse began. "Actually," Malcolm interrupted, his voice shifting, still gentle but carrying a quiet authority, "I own this hospital." My tears stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. I blinked hard, suddenly wondering if the anesthesia was still playing tricks on me. "You what?" I managed. The nurse's eyes went wide. She muttered something about checking on other patients and slipped out of the room, leaving us alone. Malcolm watched her leave, then turned back to me with a small, sad smile. "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the chair beside my bed. I could only nod. My voice had deserted me. He sat down carefully, placing his briefcase on the floor. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at me with those warm brown eyes that now seemed strangely familiar, though I still couldn't connect them to a child I'd once known. "I've been trying to find you for years," he said quietly. "Ever since I finished medical school and began building my career, I kept wondering what happened to the teacher's aide who made sure a hungry little boy never went without lunch." The heart monitor quickened again, but this time it wasn't from panic. It was a confusing swirl of disbelief, hope, and something I couldn't yet name. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Malcolm. Chen. I'm sorry, I don't remember." "You wouldn't," he said gently. "I was just one of many kids you helped, and back then, my name wasn't Chen, it was Malcolm Peterson. I was adopted by the Chen family when I was 12. He laced his fingers together tightly in his lap. "Mrs. Davis, do you remember a boy who never had lunch money? So thin his clothes never fit right? Who sat alone in the cafeteria watching the other kids eat?" Slowly, like mist lifting from an old photograph, an image began to take shape in my mind. A small boy with dark, unevenly cut hair, big brown eyes and a too thin face, clothes too large, too worn. Lunchtimes where he sat quietly at the end of a table, pretending he wasn't hungry. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Malcolm, little Malcolm, you were so quiet, so hungry," he finished softly. "Every day." He gave a small shrug. "My biological parents, well, that part doesn't really matter now. What matters is that you saw me. You noticed a kid who was slipping through the cracks, and you did something about it." The memory sharpened. 16-year-old me, working at Franklin Elementary so I could help my parents with the bills. Even then, I was learning what it meant to sacrifice for the people you love. I had noticed Malcolm because he reminded me of myself at that age, trying to disappear, trying not to be a burden. "You never asked questions," he went on, his voice thick with emotion. "You never made me feel like I was a charity case. You just found a way to make sure I had lunch every day for 2 whole years." I remembered the little rituals now, the extra lunch tickets I'd slip into his hand, the way I'd tell him the cafeteria had made too much and needed help with the leftovers, the way his entire face would light up when I handed him a tray, as if I'd handed him the world. "Malcolm," I said, fresh tears welling up, "you were just a child. You were so thin." He reached over and gently took my hand. His touch was warm and steady, and after hours of feeling abandoned and unwanted, that simple contact almost undid me. "Mrs. Davis," he said softly, "when I woke up this morning, I had no idea today would be the day I finally got to thank you. When my assistant told me there was a patient named Adrienne Davis scheduled for surgery, I had to come see if it was really you." I squeezed his hand, staring at this successful man who had once been the little boy I'd quietly tried to protect from hunger. "I can't believe it," I whispered. "Look at you. You became a doctor. You own a hospital." "Because of you," he said simply. "Because someone showed me that kindness existed in the world, that I was worth caring about." We sat there in silence for a few moments, our hands still clasped. But the monitor beeped steadily beside us. Outside, the Seattle sky was darkening, but somehow the room felt lighter than it had all day. "Mrs. Davis," Malcolm said carefully, "I noticed you were alone when I came in. Is there really no one here with you?" The question ripped open the wound I'd tried to hold together. The shame and hurt came flooding back. "My children," I said, my voice cracking. "They left. They said the parking was too expensive." Malcolm's grip tightened. A shadow crossed his face. Anger, disbelief, maybe both. When he spoke, his tone was very calm, almost too controlled. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, then it's a good thing I'm here. Because I made myself a promise a long time ago. If I ever found the woman who saved that hungry little boy, I would make sure she was never alone when she needed someone." Malcolm stayed with me until the evening shift change. For the first time since I'd woken up, I didn't feel abandoned. He arranged for the kitchen to send up a proper meal for both of us. Real food, not the bland, rubbery hospital tray they'd given me earlier. We ate slowly, carefully, while he told me how he'd gone from that starving third grader to the man sitting beside my hospital bed. "After the Chens adopted me," he said, cutting neat pieces of salmon, "everything changed. They gave me stability, education, love, but I never forgot those 2 years at Franklin Elementary. I never forgot being hungry. And I never forgot the teacher's aide who made sure I wasn't. I lifted a forkful of my own meal, still dazed by the day. I just did what anyone would do," I said. "No," Malcolm replied firmly, setting his fork down. "That's not true, and we both know it. Mrs. Davis, may I call you Adrienne?" I nodded, feeling oddly shy. This man, who owned an entire hospital, was treating me with more care and respect than my own children had. "Adrienne," he continued, "do you remember how you paid for those lunches?" I frowned, thinking back. I had my teacher's aide salary. It wasn't much, but $3 a day, he said quietly. "That's what lunch cost in 1975. You were making about $200 a month." He held my gaze. "Do you know what that $3 a day meant?" I shook my head, though a vague, uncomfortable awareness stirred in my memory. "It meant you were spending almost half your paycheck feeding me," he said softly. "A kid you barely knew. A child whose own parents couldn't even be bothered to provide for him." The realization hit me like a punch. I had forgotten, or maybe I'd buried it on purpose, just how tight money had been back then. I was 16, trying to help my own parents keep a roof over our heads. And yes, I'd been blowing almost half of my tiny paycheck making sure one little boy got to eat. I'd lived on peanut butter sandwiches for 2 years so Malcolm could have a hot lunch. "I remember now," I whispered. "I remember being hungry too." "But you were older," he said gently, "and I was just a kid, a lost one." His eyes softened. "I was lost, Adrienne, and you found me." He reached into his briefcase and pulled something out that made my heart stumble. It was a yellowed lunch card from Franklin Elementary, the kind they used to punch when you bought a meal. The cardboard was worn soft, the corners frayed, like it had been handled 1,000 times. "I kept this," he said, holding it almost reverently. "All these years. It's the last lunch card you gave me before the school year ended, before you disappeared from my life." I took it with shaking hands, instantly recognizing the feel of it. I remembered how they'd smell faintly of reheated food and metal trays. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why would you keep this?" "Because it meant hope," he replied simply. When everything felt dark and I honestly wasn't sure whether anyone cared if I lived or died, I would look at that card. It reminded me that someone had seen me, that someone thought I was worth feeding. Tears threatened again. But these weren't the jagged, humiliating kind. They felt cleaner somehow. "Malcolm, I had no idea," I said. "I just saw a hungry child and you acted," he finished gently, without hesitation, without asking for anything back. He leaned in a little closer. "Do you know what I did with that lesson?" I shook my head. "I became a doctor because I wanted to help people the way you helped me," he said. "I started in pediatrics, then moved into hospital administration so I could make a bigger impact, and every major decision I've made, every policy I've pushed through, has come down to one question: what would Adrienne do?" The weight of that settled over me like a blanket. This accomplished man, this hospital owner, had been carrying a piece of me with him for decades, while I was stumbling through life, raising kids alone, working any job I could get. I'm constantly on the edge financially. That simple act of feeding a child had been quietly growing into something far beyond my imagination. "I built my first clinic in a low-income neighborhood," Malcolm went on. "We started with a free lunch program for kids whose families couldn't afford it. Then we expanded into full medical care." He gave a small, proud smile. "Now I own 4 hospitals across the Pacific Northwest, and every single one has a program to make sure no child goes hungry while they're being treated." I stared at him, overwhelmed. "All of this because of school lunches?" "Because of you," he corrected softly. "Because you showed a little boy that kindness is real, even when the world is cruel." For a moment, we just sat there in a gentle silence, the sounds of the hospital evening wrapping around us. Somewhere down the corridor a baby wailed, an elevator chimed, nurses' shoes squeaked on linoleum. Life kept moving, people were being cared for. "Malcolm," I said at last, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied. "How did you find me? Today. After all these years, how did you know I was here?" His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "I've had an ongoing request with a few private investigation firms for about 15 years, he said. "Anytime an Adrienne Davis of roughly your age popped up in public records in the Pacific Northwest, they flagged it for me. When you registered for surgery here, I got an alert." "You've been looking for me for 15 years?" I repeated, stunned. "Longer," he said quietly, "but I only had the resources to really search over the last 15. He studied me carefully. "Adrienne, I know this might sound intrusive, but I've learned quite a bit about your life. I wanted to be certain I'd found the right person before I approached you." A chill slid down my spine. "What kind of things?" I asked. His jaw tightened just a fraction. "I know your life hasn't been easy," he said. 3 children, a divorce when they were still young, you working every job you could to keep them fed and clothed, cleaning offices at night, substitute teaching during the day, weekend shifts at a grocery store. Each detail landed like a small, deliberate blow. My entire existence reduced to bullet points, years of exhaustion and worry packaged into neat little facts. "I know you've been living on a fixed income since you retired," he continued gently, Social Security and a modest school district pension. Around $1,200 a month. I nodded, embarrassed. It's not much, but it covers my little apartment and the basics. Barely, but enough. And I know, Malcolm went on, his voice dropping, that despite having so little yourself, you've been supporting your children financially for years. He ticked them off softly, as if trying not to hurt me, even while telling the truth. David's accounting practice that nearly went under 5 years ago. You took out a loan against your pension to help him. Sarah's credit card debt when she was unemployed for 8 months. You've been making the minimum payments. Michael's car last year. That down payment came from you too. My face burned with shame. I didn't even know why. These were my choices. But hearing them laid out like a ledger made them sound desperate, almost pathetic. How do you even... I started. Financial records aren't that hard to trace when you know what to look for, he said, not unkindly. Adrian, I'm not condemning you. I understand the impulse to sacrifice for your children. I really do. But I've also discovered some other things. The way he said it made my stomach twist. What other things? Malcolm was silent for several seconds, clearly choosing his words with care. I know none of your children have visited you in the last 6 months before today, he said finally. I know David didn't return your calls last month when you mentioned having chest pains. I know Sarah borrowed $2,000 from you in December and hasn't spoken to you since. Each statement was a clean, precise cut. I opened my mouth to defend them, to say they were busy, that they had their own lives, that I understood, but nothing came out. And I know, Malcolm added, his voice soft with compassion, that when you called each of them to tell them about today's surgery, you had to leave voicemails. None of them called you back until this morning. The tears came back, but they weren't the wild, panicked sobs from earlier. This time they felt heavier, older, like the weight of truths I'd been dodging for years finally settling into my bones. They're just busy, I whispered. It was the same excuse I'd been feeding myself forever. They have their own families, their own problems. Adrian, Malcolm said softly. When I was 8 and the Chens adopted me, I made myself a promise. I promised that if I ever got the chance to repay your kindness, I would. But I also promised I would never stand by and watch anyone be treated the way my biological parents treated me. He leaned forward, his eyes intense but still full of kindness. I've been watching your children's behavior for months, ever since I confirmed you were the Adrian Davis I've been looking for. And what I've seen... He paused, as if choosing his words. What I've seen worries me deeply. My heart started to pound, the monitor beside my bed speeding up in time with it. What do you mean? Malcolm reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a manila folder. He hesitated, holding it between his hands like he was weighing its burden. Adrienne, I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you comes from a place of care, he said quietly. I owe you my life. I'm not going to stand by and watch people exploit your kindness the way mine was exploited. He opened the folder. I saw papers inside, documents, letters, printouts with official letterheads. 3 weeks ago, he began carefully, David met with an elder law attorney. Sarah has been researching nursing homes near you, and Michael has been asking around about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent. The world tilted. I grabbed the bed rail, sure I was about to be sick. That can't be right, I breathed. They wouldn't do that. They're my children. They love me. Malcolm's expression was infinitely gentle, but his words were like a scalpel. I'm sure they do love you in their own way, he said. But, Adrienne, I think there are things about their finances and their plans that you need to see for yourself. The folder in his hands suddenly looked huge, threatening. Part of me wanted to shove it away, to pretend none of this was happening. Another part, a quieter, stronger part, needed to know. Maybe I shouldn't show you this while you're still recovering, Malcolm said, noticing how the monitors were screaming my anxiety to the room. No, I said, surprising both of us with the steadiness of my voice. I need to know. I've spent too many years making excuses for them, haven't I? Malcolm nodded slowly, then opened the folder wider. "Nothing I'm about to show you was obtained illegally," he said. "It's all public record, or information shared with me by people who were worried about what they were seeing." He pulled out the first page, an email printout. "This is from the elder care attorney David spoke to," Malcolm explained. "The attorney was disturbed enough by the conversation that she reached out to me through mutual professional contacts." My hands shook as I took the paper. The email was addressed to a woman named Patricia Henley, Elder Law Associates. The text blurred as my eyes skimmed down, until one paragraph snapped into focus and burned itself into my brain. Mr. Davis inquired specifically about the process and timeline for declaring an elderly parent mentally incompetent, with particular emphasis on situations where the parent is too generous for their own good and making poor financial choices that may impact the family's inheritance. The words hit like a punch to the chest. I read the paragraph again, hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. David hadn't been asking how to help a confused mother with dementia. He'd been asking how to legally seize control of a mother who was giving away what he clearly saw as his money. The attorney, Malcolm said gently, was disturbed enough by his questions that she refused to take him as a client. That's why she reached out. She wanted someone to be aware that there might be an elderly person at risk. I set the email down with trembling fingers. "What else?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Malcolm hesitated, then drew out another sheet. "This is a printout of an online conversation between Sarah and a friend," he said. "The friend was so upset by what Sarah wrote that she took screenshots. Eventually, those screenshots made their way to me. The messages were from Facebook between Sarah and someone named Jennifer Moss. I knew that name. Jennifer had been Sarah's college roommate. My eyes locked onto my daughter's words, each line like a knife twisting deeper. Mom is driving me crazy with her bleeding heart act. Do you know she gave $500 to some charity last month? $500, while I'm drowning in credit card debt. She's 64 and acting like she's going to live forever. Doesn't she get that money should be going to her family? Jen, if she keeps giving money away, there'll be nothing left for us when she's gone. David thinks we need to step in before she gets too old and starts getting scammed by everyone. We're looking into some options. There are ways to protect elderly people from themselves, if you know what I mean." I couldn't read another word. The phone in my hand slipped, and Malcolm caught it before it hit the floor. The betrayal was so total, so clear, that I felt hollow. This wasn't some stranger talking about a case file. This was my daughter, my own child, talking about me like I was a troublesome asset that needed managing. "There's more," Malcolm said quietly, "but maybe—" "Show me," I interrupted. My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. It was flat, cold. "Show me everything." He pulled out the next document. Worse than the others, it was a credit report. My credit report. Someone had requested it recently, and the inquiry was from David's accounting firm. "How did he get this?" I asked, though deep down I already knew. "You gave him your social security number and other personal information when he helped you set up online banking last year," Malcolm said. "He's been monitoring your finances without your knowledge." The report laid everything bare. My small savings account with $3,400 in it. My checking account that hovered around $200 most months. The details on the report were like a spotlight on every quiet sacrifice I'd made. The small loan I'd taken against my pension to keep David's business afloat. The ongoing payments on Sarah's credit card debt. Even the $50 monthly donation to the local animal shelter. But then I saw something else. Neater, colder. A note scrawled in the margin in David's precise accountant handwriting. Unnecessary charitable giving, approximately $800 per year, could be redirected. "He's been tracking my donations," I whispered. $50 a month to help abandoned animals, and he thinks it's unnecessary. Malcolm's jaw tightened, anger visible in the controlled set of his face. "There's one more thing, Adrian," he said quietly. "This is the hardest to hear, but I think you need to know." He pulled out his phone and opened an audio file. "This was recorded yesterday in the hospital parking lot after they left. The security officer who captured it felt he had an obligation to document what he heard. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, so Malcolm steadied it and pressed play. The audio was a bit muffled, but my children's voices were unmistakable. David, look, the procedure went fine. She's going to be fine. There's no point in us sitting around here all day paying $20 for parking. Sarah, I just feel weird leaving her alone. Michael with a short laugh. She's been alone most of her life anyway. It's not like she's going to know the difference. David again. The important thing is, we showed up. We've established we're concerned children. That's what matters when it's time to make decisions about her care. Sarah, when do you think that'll be? David, couple of years. Maybe sooner if her health declines. The key is to start laying the groundwork now, show a pattern of irresponsible spending, get documentation of her making bad decisions. Michael, like giving away money to strangers. David, exactly. The animal shelter donations, all those random acts of kindness she's always doing. We frame it as early dementia. Our confusion about finances. Sarah, but she's not confused, she's just generous. David, generous with our inheritance. Look, that house is worth $300,000. Her savings and pension come to another $150,000, maybe more. Do you really want to watch her give it all away to every sob story that comes along? Michael, David's right. We need to protect her from herself and protect our future. The recording went on for another minute. My children dissecting my life like a spreadsheet, treating me as a liability to be controlled, assigning numbers to my existence and strategizing how to take over my decisions. When the audio ended, the hospital room felt brutally silent. I stared at Malcolm's phone long after the sound stopped. In less than an hour, I'd learned that the 3 people I loved most in the world didn't see me as a mother at all. To them, I was a risk to their financial stability. Every act of kindness I'd ever shown, every donation, every small generosity, they saw it all as theft from their future. They think I'm losing my mind, I said at last, my voice barely more than air. They're planning to have me declared incompetent because I give $50 a month to help animals. Adrian, Malcolm said gently, there's something else. The real reason they left today wasn't the parking fee. I looked up at him, stunned that there could be anything worse than what I'd already heard. They went to meet with another attorney while you were in recovery, he said. Someone more willing to explore options. The appointment was scheduled for this afternoon. The picture snapped into brutal focus. My children hadn't left because parking was expensive. They had left to go discuss how to take control of my life. While I was unconscious on an operating table, they were in a lawyer's office asking how to have me declared mentally unfit. How long have you known about this? I asked. I started digging 3 months ago, once I confirmed you were the Adrienne Davis I'd been searching for, he said. At first, I just wanted to understand your situation, to see if there was a way to repay you quietly, without disrupting your life. He ran a hand through his hair, looking pained. But the more I uncovered about your children's behavior, the more worried I became. The pattern was clear. They were isolating you, monitoring your finances, and setting the stage to take control. Why didn't you contact me sooner? I asked. His expression tightened with regret. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me, he admitted, and because I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that when it really mattered, like today, they'd prove me wrong by being here for you. He held my gaze. Instead, they proved who they really are, by leaving. Yes, I whispered. I sank back against the pillows, feeling a kind of exhaustion that went far beyond the surgery. It felt like mourning 3 people who were still alive. The children I thought I had raised, the children I believed loved me, had never truly existed. Those versions of them lived only in my imagination. The real David, Sarah, and Michael were strangers who saw me as a dwindling account number with an inconvenient conscience attached. Malcolm, I said finally, after a long silence. What happens now? He leaned forward, his face serious but full of warmth. That depends on what you want to happen, he said. But Adrian, you need to know something. You are not alone in this. I made a promise to myself about you, and I intend to keep it." "What kind of promise?" "The promise that if I ever found you, I would make sure you were protected and cared for the way you protected and cared for me," he said, his voice firming. "Your children may see you as a problem to manage, but I see you as the woman who saved my life, and I'll be damned if I let anyone treat you the way they're planning to." For the first time since I'd opened my eyes after surgery, something other than pain and betrayal stirred inside me. A small, fragile thread of hope. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. Malcolm smiled, and for a heartbeat I could see the grateful little boy he'd once been. "Well," he said, reaching for his briefcase again, owning hospitals comes with certain advantages, and having excellent lawyers doesn't hurt either." He pulled out a different folder, this one thick with official-looking documents. "Adrienne, how would you feel about making some changes to your life?" he asked. "Changes that would ensure you're never at anyone's mercy again." I looked at the folder, then back at Malcolm's determined, kind face. Outside, the Seattle sky continued to darken, but somehow the room felt brighter than it had all day. "Tell me more," I said. Malcolm opened the new folder with the precision of a surgeon. The documents inside felt different from the ones I'd just seen. Not like weapons, but like lifelines. "Adrienne," he began, his tone shifting into something calm and professional, yet still warm. "What I'm about to suggest may feel like a lot. But every part of this has been carefully planned. I've been preparing for this conversation for years, ever since I started looking for you." I shifted in the bed, wincing as the IV pulled at my arm. "What kind of preparation?" He took out the first document, a formal-looking legal file. 5 years ago, I created something called the Adrienne Davis Foundation," he said. "It's a charitable organization devoted to 2 things, making sure children never go hungry, and making sure elderly people who spent their lives helping others are protected and honored in their later years." I stared at the paper, at my own name printed in crisp letters at the top. It felt surreal, like I was looking at someone else's life. "You started a foundation in my name, before you even found me?" I asked. "I did," he admitted, "with the intention of asking your permission once I found you. If you'd refused, I would have changed the name immediately. But Adrienne, for the last 5 years, this foundation has been funding school meal programs all over Washington. More than 10,000 children have been fed because of the example you set when you bought a little boy lunch." His words sank in slowly. While I'd been counting pennies and worrying about whether I could afford to help my own children, Malcolm had been quietly feeding thousands of kids in my honor. While my children saw my small charity as robbing them of inheritance, this man had turned that same spirit of generosity into something vast and tangible. "I don't understand," I said softly. "What does this have to do with me now?" He grew more serious. "The foundation has considerable assets," he said. "Enough that you never have to worry about money again, and just as importantly, enough to ensure your children can never plausibly claim that you're financially incompetent or incapable of making sound decisions." He slid another document toward me, this one full of numbers. "I'd like to offer you a position as executive director of the foundation with an annual salary of $125,000. I almost choked. "Malcolm, that's more than I've ever earned in a year." "It's less than you deserve," he replied firmly. "But the real point is this. As an actively employed executive director, no judge is going to accept your children's claim that you're mentally unfit. Their plan collapses the moment you step into this role." My head spun, and it wasn't from anesthesia. "But I don't know anything about running a foundation," I protested. "I don't have the education or the experience." "You have something more valuable than degrees," Malcolm said gently. "You have the heart and instincts this foundation is built around, and you won't be doing it alone. You'll have a full staff to handle the legal and administrative work. Your job would be to guide the mission, to decide which programs to support, to be the moral center of an organization built on kindness." The irony hit me hard. My children wanted to strip me of control because they thought I was too generous. Malcolm was offering me leadership of an entire institution devoted to generosity. "There's more," he said, pulling out another stack of papers. "I've also purchased a home for you, if you want it." "You what?" "It's in Sunset Gardens, a private community about 20 minutes from here," he explained. "It's a beautiful neighborhood designed for active older adults who want independence, but also have access to support services if they need them. The house is fully paid off, no mortgage, no rent, no monthly housing payments." I felt like I was drowning in kindness after a lifetime of barely treading water. "Malcolm, this is too much," I said quietly. "I can't accept all this." "You can," he said, his tone taking on the quiet authority of a man used to making big decisions. "And you should." "Adrian, let me ask you something. When you paid for my lunches all those years ago, did you expect anything in return?" "Of course not." "Then why is it so hard to believe that I want to help you without expecting anything back?" I didn't have a good answer. Maybe after so many years of people wanting something from me, time, money, favors, I'd forgotten what real, no-strings-attached kindness looked like. Malcolm picked up a tablet and swiped to a set of photos. He turned the screen toward me. It was a single-story house with a wraparound porch and a garden that looked like something out of a catalog. "The house comes fully furnished," he said, "but you can change whatever you like. There's a community center, walking paths, optional meal plans. You could move in as soon as you're discharged." I studied the pictures, trying to imagine myself in those rooms, on that porch. It looked like the kind of peaceful retirement I'd never even let myself dream about. "What about my apartment?" I asked. "We'll take care of everything," he said. "Packing, moving, donating whatever you don't want, logistics, paperwork, all of it." His voice softened. "Adrian, I want you to hear this clearly. This isn't charity, it's justice. You gave a hungry child dignity and hope. That child grew up and now he wants to give you safety and peace." I looked from the photos back to Malcolm's earnest face. "And my children?" I asked quietly. "What about them? They'll be furious. They'll think I'm being irrational, taking help from a stranger." His expression hardened just a little. "With all due respect, Adrian, your children's opinions shouldn't be the deciding factor in how you live your life, especially when they seem more invested in preserving their inheritance than in your happiness." I knew he was right, but unlearning decades of putting my children first wasn't something I could do in a single conversation, even after seeing who they really were. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Anything?" I asked. "Then tell me something. Why now? You've been looking for me for years. You could have come to me at any time. Why wait until I'm lying in a hospital bed?" Malcolm fell silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. "Because I needed to be sure you truly needed help," he said at last. "I've been watching from a distance for months, hoping your children would step up, hoping they'd show even a fraction of the kindness you showed me. Today, when they walked out on you after surgery, I realized I couldn't wait any longer." He leaned forward slightly. "And if I'm completely honest, I was afraid you'd refuse if you weren't in a place where you could see how alone you really are." His honesty hit me hard. He was right. 6 months ago, I would have brushed him off, insisted I was fine, made excuses for my children like I always did. "There's one more thing," Malcolm said, taking out a final document. "This part is entirely optional, but I wanted you to have it as an option." He handed me a paper. It was a will. My will, already drafted with my name and details on it. I asked my legal team to prepare this based on what we know about your current finances and, as far as we can tell, your values, he explained. "You can change any line, tear it up, ignore it completely. I just thought it might help to see a clear alternative to what your children are planning." I read through it. I was surprised by how carefully it reflected things I'd only vaguely wished for. Instead of leaving my small estate to my children, the will created a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids, donated my house to a charity supporting single mothers, and laid out specific instructions for my care if I were ever unable to make decisions myself. "This leaves my children nothing," I said quietly. "That's right," he replied. "Given their apparent intent to declare you incompetent just to gain access to your assets, we believe this is the safest course." I put the will down and looked at Malcolm, this man who had appeared in my darkest moment like an answer to a prayer I hadn't known I'd made. "You really have thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've done my best," he said. "I want you to have real options, not the illusion of choice while other people quietly steer your life." He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "But I need you to understand something. None of this comes with strings. If you decide to reconcile with your children, I'll support that. If you decide to leave them your inheritance after all, I'll support that too. If you choose to stay in your small apartment and live quietly, I'll still be in your corner." "Even if you think I'm making a mistake?" I asked. "Even then," he said gently, "because that's what you did for me. You helped without trying to control what I'd become later." I sank back into the pillows, overwhelmed. He was offering me everything I'd never dared to imagine: financial stability, a beautiful home, meaningful work, legal protection from my own children, all from someone who owed me nothing and yet remembered everything. "Malcolm," I said slowly, "what happens if I say yes to all of this and then my children try to fight it, claim you're manipulating me or exploiting me?" His smile turned sharp and confident. "Let them try," he said. "I own 4 hospitals, I work with some of the best attorneys in the state, and we have solid evidence of their attempts to manipulate you. More importantly, you'd be employed, housed, and surrounded by people who can attest to your competence and independence." He took out a business card and handed it to me. "This is my personal attorney, Rebecca Martinez. She specializes in elder law and financial abuse prevention. She already knows about your situation and is ready to represent you if necessary." I turned the card over in my hand, feeling its weight like armor. "You really have thought of everything," I murmured. "I've had 15 years to think," Malcolm said simply. "Adrian, I know this is a lot to absorb, especially right after surgery. You don't have to decide anything today. These offers aren't going anywhere." A soft knock broke the moment. The nurse from earlier peeked in looking apologetic. "Mrs. Davis, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are 3 people here who say they're your children. They'd like to see you." My heart monitor immediately sped up, the rapid beeping giving me away. Malcolm noticed and rested a calming hand on my arm. "It's your choice," he said quietly. "You can see them now or ask them to come back tomorrow when you feel stronger." I glanced at the papers spread across my bed, the foundation forms, the photos of the house, the will that would shield everything I'd worked for from the very people planning to strip me of control. Then I looked at Malcolm, who had turned my worst day into something that almost resembled hope. "Send them in," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "It's time to hear what they have to say." As the nurse left to fetch them, I gathered up all of Malcolm's documents and handed them back. "Can you keep these with you for now?" "Of course," he said, sliding everything back into his briefcase. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted him there as a shield. Another part knew I needed to face my children on my own, to see with clear eyes whether there was any true concern beneath their calculations. "Would you mind waiting just outside?" I asked, "in case I need you." Malcolm stood and adjusted his jacket. "I'll be right outside the door," he said. "If you need anything at all, just call my name." As he reached the doorway, I spoke softly. "Malcolm." He turned back. "Thank you," I said, "for everything, for remembering, for caring, for giving me choices." His smile was warm and gentle. "Thank you, Adrian, for teaching a hungry little boy that kindness is real," Malcolm said softly. "Everything good in my life started with that lesson." He stepped into the hallway and almost immediately I heard voices approaching. David's confident tone, Sarah's nervous little laugh, Michael's joking bravado, my children coming to visit their mother after walking out on her to meet with lawyers about taking over her life. I closed my eyes and drew in a long breath. For the first time in years, I actually felt steady, strong. It was time to see what they wanted this time. Their voices grew louder as they neared my room, and my heart rate jumped in a way that had nothing to do with my surgery. Through the thin walls, I could hear David talking in that clipped, authoritative way he always used, the one he'd learned from his father and perfected with clients at his firm. "I still think we should have stayed," Sarah said, anxiety sharpening her voice. "What if something had gone wrong?" "Nothing went wrong," David replied briskly. "The procedure was routine." "We confirmed that with the surgeon before we left." Michael snorted. "Come on, Sarah. She's fine. She's always fine. Mom's like a cockroach. She'll survive anything." Even after everything Malcolm had already shown me, the careless cruelty of that comment hit me like a punch. It stung more knowing they were about to walk in and pretend to be loving, concerned children. The door opened and the three of them filed in. David went first, as always. He wore his navy important meeting suit and the expression I'd seen him use on difficult clients: controlled, professional, carefully arranged. Sarah followed, clutching a small, tired-looking bouquet that screamed, "Hospital gift shop, 5 minutes ago." Michael trailed behind, eyes glued to his phone, thumbs already moving. "Mom!" Sarah exclaimed, her voice overly bright as she hurried to my bedside. "How are you feeling? We've been so worried." I studied her face, searching for any hint of real worry beneath the performance. Her makeup was flawless, her hair freshly styled. Apparently there'd been time to get ready before rushing back to see the mother they'd left alone. "I'm fine," I said quietly, taking the flowers she shoved toward me. They were already starting to wilt, petals drooping under the fluorescent light. "Thank you for these." David took up position at the foot of the bed, hands clasped behind his back like he was about to deliver a quarterly report. "We spoke to Dr. Harrison before we came in," he said. "He said the surgery went perfectly. No complications." "That's what he told me as well," I replied, watching him carefully. There was a tightness around his eyes, a calculating look I knew all too well. Michael finally glanced up from his phone. "You look good, Mom. I mean, for someone who just had heart surgery." "Thank you, Michael. That's very reassuring," I said dryly. If he noticed the sarcasm, he didn't show it. His attention was already back on his screen. Apparently, he had used up his daily quota of interest in his mother. "So," David began, lowering himself into the chair Malcolm had just been in, "we need to discuss a few things. Practical things." There it was. The real reason for their visit. Sarah perched on the edge of the other chair, fingers twisted together in her lap. "We've been thinking, Mom, and we're worried about you living alone, especially after today." "What about today worries you?" I asked, keeping my tone even. David leaned forward slightly. "Mom, you're 64. You just had heart surgery. What if something happens when you're home by yourself? What if you fall or have another episode?" "I have my life alert pendant," I said, "and my neighbors check on me." "Mrs. Henderson is 87, Michael muttered, not looking up. "What's she going to do, call 911 and then stand there wringing her hands?" Sarah shot him a sharp look. "What Michael means is that we think you might be better off somewhere with professional staff, people who are trained to handle emergencies." A cold prickle ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They weren't just concerned children. They were already easing into the script I'd heard on that recording, laying the groundwork. "Are you talking about a nursing home?" I asked plainly. "Not a nursing home," David said quickly. "More like an assisted living facility. Somewhere nice where you'd have your own apartment but with support available." "I see," I said, looking from one face to the next. These three people who shared my blood and yet felt like strangers. "Have you looked into any specific places?" A faint blush crept into Sarah's cheeks. "We've done some preliminary research, just to understand the options. There are some really beautiful communities that specialize in active seniors." "Active seniors who have just had heart surgery?" I asked. "Mom, don't be dramatic," David snapped, his patience thinning. "We're talking about your safety and well-being. As your children, we have a responsibility to make sure you're properly cared for." Coming from him, the word responsibility was almost laughable. Where was that responsibility this morning when I woke up alone and terrified? Where was it during the last year when my phone stayed silent and my door stayed closed? I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm not ready to give up my independence. Michael finally lifted his eyes again, looking at me like I'd just said something ridiculous. Mom, independence is great when you're young and healthy, he said, but you're not young anymore, and clearly your health is becoming an issue. My health is becoming an issue, I repeated. I had a blocked artery. It was fixed. Dr. Harrison expects a full recovery. For now, David said darkly, but heart disease is progressive. This is just the start. You need to start thinking realistically about the future. I felt something rise up inside me then, not fear, not shame, but anger, clean, sharp, and long overdue. What I need to think about, I said evenly, is why my children seem more interested in managing my future than supporting me in my present. The room went still. Sarah's flowers rustled as she shifted in her chair. Michael's phone buzzed again, but for the first time since he'd walked in, he didn't immediately grab it. David's jaw tightened. I could see him fighting to keep his professional mask in place. That's not fair, Mom, Sarah said at last. We're here now. We care about you. You're here now, I agreed. Where were you 4 hours ago when I woke up alone and crying? We explained that, David said stiffly. The parking? $20, I cut in. The daily parking fee is $20. You left your mother alone after heart surgery to avoid paying $20. Michael's phone buzzed again. This time he snatched it up as if relieved for the excuse. Sorry, I have to take this. It's a client. Of course it was. He stepped out into the hallway, already mid-pitch on some sales call that was clearly more important than his recovering mother. David watched him go with a flicker of irritation before turning back to me. Mom, you're clearly upset, and I get that. Surgery is stressful, he said in that patronizing tone that made me feel like one of his clients who didn't understand tax codes. But you're not thinking clearly about the bigger picture. And what bigger picture would that be, David? Your finances, he said bluntly. Do you have any idea what this surgery is going to cost? Even with Medicare, ongoing cardiac care isn't cheap. You can't afford to live alone and keep up with the medical expenses you're going to have. There it was, the truth, stripped of any pretense. Not my comfort, not my fear, not my loneliness. Money. I see, I said quietly. And I'm guessing you already have a solution in mind for this financial problem. Sarah leaned forward, a little too quickly. Actually, we do. If you moved into an assisted living facility, you could sell your house, use that money to pay for your care. It would probably cover several years, longer if you chose somewhere more modest. And when that money's gone? I asked. David gave a small shrug. Then Medicaid kicks in, the state takes over, but by then you'd be settled, used to the routine. I just stared at them, amazed at how efficiently they'd planned it all out. Sell my house, spend down my assets. Hand the rest over to the state. Neat, clean, convenient. And as a bonus, they'd never have to argue about my inheritance because there'd be nothing left to inherit. Have you spoken to anyone about this? I asked. Anyone who actually knows how to navigate these decisions? David's eyes flickered, just for a second. If I hadn't known what to look for, I might have missed it. We've done some research, he said carefully. Talk to people who understand elder care law. I see. Anyone in particular I should know about? Sarah frowned slightly, clearly unsure why I was asking. David's expression went more guarded. Just some preliminary consultations, he said. Nothing formal. A soft knock tapped at the door before I could say more. Malcolm stepped inside, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. He still wore his immaculate suit and carried his briefcase. But the warmth he'd shown me before was replaced with a more professional, composed demeanor. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Mrs. Davis, I wanted to check how you're feeling before I head home for the evening." David sprang to his feet, every instinct in him recognizing power and money when he saw it. "I'm sorry," David said quickly. "Are you one of Mom's doctors?" Malcolm smiled, polite, distant, the kind of smile I'd seen on administrators and executives, not the gentle one he'd given me earlier. "I'm Malcolm Chen," he said. "I own this hospital." The reaction was instant. David's entire posture shifted into something almost deferential. Sarah stood up, smoothing her hair as if she'd just realized she was in the presence of royalty. Michael, who had drifted back into the room mid-call, actually put his phone away. "Mr. Chen," David said, extending his hand. "David Davis. I'm Adrian's son. This is my sister Sarah and my brother Michael. We can't thank you enough for the excellent care our mother has received." Malcolm shook their hands one by one, his expression calmly neutral. "Your mother has received the same standard of care we strive to provide all our patients," he replied. "Though, I will say, she is a remarkable woman." "Oh, absolutely," Sarah gushed. "Mom's always been special. We're so grateful she's here in such good hands." I watched the display with a mix of disgust and dark curiosity. These were the same children who had left me alone after surgery, who were plotting to have me declared incompetent. But in front of someone wealthy and powerful, they transformed into the picture of devoted, grateful offspring. "Mr. Chen," David said, sliding smoothly into what I recognized as his networking voice. "Do you have a few minutes to discuss our mother's situation? We're trying to make some decisions about her ongoing care." Malcolm's expression didn't change, but I noticed a faint tension around his eyes. "What sort of decisions?" he asked. "Well, we're concerned about her living alone given her age and recent health issues," David replied. "We've been looking into assisted living options." "I see," Malcolm said. His tone was carefully neutral. "And what does Mrs. Davis think about these options?" David glanced briefly at me, then back at Malcolm. "She's been resistant," he said. "But we feel it's important to plan ahead, to be proactive rather than reactive." "Proactive," Malcolm echoed thoughtfully. "Yes, I can certainly understand the value of that." He paused, as though considering something. "In my experience running healthcare facilities," he went on, "the patients who fare the best are the ones who feel they have real control over their care decisions." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Oh, absolutely. We want Mom to feel like she's part of the process. Of course." "Of course," Malcolm agreed smoothly, "though I've also noticed that sometimes family members have different priorities than the patients themselves. It's understandable. Everyone wants what they believe is best." There was a subtle edge under his words, just sharp enough to make David shift in his chair. "Well, yes," David said. "Sometimes elderly parents don't fully understand the complexities of their situation." Malcolm nodded slowly. "That can happen," he said. "Although I've found that people usually make very good choices when they're given complete information and the right support." Then he turned toward me, and his expression softened just slightly, warmth flickering back into his eyes. "Mrs. Davis, how are you feeling about your recovery?" Malcolm asked, turning fully toward me. "Do you feel confident managing your care going forward?" I met his eyes, understanding that this was more than polite bedside chatter. "I actually feel much stronger," I said. "More confident than I have in a long time." "That's wonderful to hear." He turned back to my children. "Well, I'll let you continue your visit. Mrs. Davis, please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything at all. Anything." The way he emphasized that last word hung in the air. David frowned slightly, clearly trying to figure out why the hospital owner was taking such a personal interest in me. Sarah looked flustered. Michael had already gone back to his phone. When Malcolm stepped out, the room suddenly felt smaller. David sat back down, but some of his earlier confidence had drained away. "That was interesting," he said at last. "I wonder why the hospital owner would be personally checking on your case." I lifted a shoulder. "Maybe he's just very hands-on with patients." "Maybe," David murmured, though I could practically see the gears turning in his head. Sarah still looked bewildered. "He seemed really nice, and very successful." "And very rich," Michael added, finally contributing something other than sarcasm. By then, an idea had begun to form in my mind. Quietly at first, then more solid by the second. I studied my 3 children. David, already calculating how this new connection might be useful to him. Sarah, eternally anxious about money and appearances. Michael, whose interest began and ended with whatever benefited him immediately. "You know," I said slowly, "maybe you're right about planning ahead." All 3 of them snapped their attention to me. "I probably should think more seriously about my future," I went on. "Make some changes while I'm still healthy enough to decide things for myself." David leaned forward, sensing victory. "That's exactly what we've been trying to tell you, Mom." "Yes," I said thoughtfully, "I should definitely make some changes. Just not the ones they were hoping for." 6 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my new house in Sunset Gardens, watching morning mist drift up from the community lake. The home Malcolm had shown me in photographs was even more beautiful in person. Warm wood floors, big windows that flooded every room with light, and a kitchen designed for someone who cooked because they wanted to, not because they had to stretch every dollar. The move had been so much easier than I'd imagined. Within a week of my hospital stay, Malcolm's team had handled everything. My old apartment was packed by professionals. The things I wanted were delivered here, the rest donated to local charities. My children had been told I was moving to a senior community for health reasons. That was technically true, so they hadn't pushed too hard. What they didn't know was that this wasn't the modest, assisted living facility they'd had in mind, but something much closer to a luxury retirement resort, fully paid for with no rent or mortgage. And the 6-figure salary from the Adrienne Davis Foundation meant my days of worrying over money were gone. I took a sip of my coffee, real, high-quality coffee, not the bargain bin stuff I used to buy, and opened the letter that had arrived yesterday. I recognized David's neat, controlled handwriting. "Dear Mom, I hope you're settling in well at your new place. We haven't heard much from you since you moved, and we're concerned. Sarah tried calling last week but got your voicemail. We'd like to visit soon to see how you're doing and make sure you have everything you need. Also, we should probably discuss your financial arrangements. I'm worried about how you're managing the costs of your new living situation on your fixed income. Please call me when you get this. Love, David." I set the letter down beside my morning newspaper, the Seattle Times, delivered daily alongside the Wall Street Journal and our local community newsletter. David's concern for my fixed income was almost touching in a way. He had no idea that my income had multiplied by about 10 since the last time he'd audited my life. My phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. Malcolm's name appeared on the screen, and I smiled as I answered. "Good morning, Malcolm." "Good morning, Adrienne. How are you today?" "Wonderful," I said, and this time I truly meant it. "I just finished reviewing the applications for our new school lunch program in Tacoma. I think we should fund all 3 schools that applied, even the one with the questionable budgeting." He laughed. "Especially that one. Sometimes the places that look the worst on paper are where the need is greatest. I learned that from a very wise woman who once fed a hungry boy without asking for anything back." I chuckled. "I thought you were the one always lecturing me that hunger doesn't wait for perfect conditions." "I'll never get used to hearing my own words turned on me," he said fondly. "All right, all 3 schools get funded. What else is on your agenda today?" "I'm meeting with the architect this afternoon about the new community center," I said, mentally running through my list. "Then I have a conference call with the Portland office at 3. And I still need to look over the next round of scholarship applications." Every now and then the contrast still startled me. For years my biggest decisions had been which overdue bill to pay first and whether I could afford a new pair of shoes. Now I was choosing which programs would feed thousands of children and which students would be able to go to college. "You sound busy," Malcolm said. "Good busy or overwhelmed busy?" "The best kind," I told him. "The kind where you crawl into bed tired but content." "I'm glad," he said. "Oh, before I forget, there's something I wanted to mention. I had an interesting conversation yesterday." "Oh?" I asked. "With who?" "Someone called my office with questions about you," he said, "specifically about your role at the foundation, your position, salary, mental competence. things like that. My stomach tightened. Let me guess. David? That would be my assumption, Malcolm replied. My assistant handled it very professionally. She confirmed that you're a full-time executive director in excellent standing and that there are no concerns whatsoever about your performance or decision-making. How would he even know to call your office? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Probably the same way he noticed the increased deposits into your bank account, Malcolm said. He's been monitoring your finances, remember? That was true. David had helped me set up online banking, which meant he likely still had access. He would have seen the salary payments from the foundation and gone digging. What happens now? I asked. Nothing happens, Malcolm said calmly. You're employed by a legitimate, well-established charitable organization. You live independently, pay your own bills, and manage your own affairs. There's nothing for anyone to challenge. Relief washed over me in a slow, warm wave. For months, I'd been bracing for some kind of confrontation, for my children to somehow figure out the truth and try to interfere. But Malcolm was right. What exactly could they do? I was healthier, happier, and more secure than I'd been in decades. Actually, Malcolm added, there is one more thing. I also got a call from an elder law attorney yesterday, someone named Patricia Henley. My breath caught. That was the same attorney who'd refused to help David with his first attempt to have me declared incompetent. She wanted me to know, Malcolm continued, that the same client who came to her 6 months ago has been calling other lawyers in the area. He's asking more specific questions now about challenging the financial decisions of elderly parents. Things like whether a large salary increase could be seen as exploitation, or whether a new job might be used as proof that someone is being coerced or manipulated. I felt anger flare, hot and clean. Even now, even with my life finally stable and meaningful, David still couldn't leave it alone. He couldn't simply accept that I had made choices without his permission. Malcolm, I asked slowly, is there anything they can actually do, legally? Not a thing, he said firmly. You're clearly competent. You live independently. You manage complex professional work. Any decent attorney would tell them they don't have a case. They're just fishing, searching for leverage they don't have and won't get. I set my coffee cup down and looked out over the small lake. A mother duck glided across the water, her ducklings paddling in a straight line behind her. Simple love. Simple trust. A parent caring for her young without being treated like a resource to exploit. You know what's strange? I said. For months, I kept waiting to feel guilty about cutting them off, waiting for that old mother instinct to push me to help them again. And it never came, I said quietly. Instead, I feel free. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not responsible for anyone else's messes or bad decisions. How does that feel? He asked. Terrifying, I admitted, and wonderful. Malcolm was silent for a moment. Adrienne, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret it? The way things ended with them? I thought about it for a long moment. I regret that it had to end this way, I said. I regret that they never saw me as anything more than a source of money and support. I regret all the years I spent making excuses for their selfishness. I paused, but I don't regret choosing myself for once. Good, Malcolm said simply, because you should have been chosen 40 years ago, and you certainly deserve it now. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a while, thinking about the strange path that had brought me here. A heart problem had led to surgery. Surgery had led to abandonment. Abandonment had led to the most unexpected reunion of my life. My phone buzzed with a text, and for a second I wondered if it was one of my children, finally reaching out just to ask how I was, not to question my bank balance. But the number was unfamiliar. Mrs. Davis, this is Jennifer Chen, Malcolm's daughter. I'm a sophomore at the University of Washington, and I'm writing a paper about charitable organizations for my sociology class. Dad told me about the foundation and suggested I interview you about its impact on local communities. Would you be available to meet sometime this week? Thank you, Jenny. I smiled, genuinely delighted at the thought of meeting Malcolm's daughter and telling her how one small act, paying for a little boy's lunch, had grown into something that now fed thousands of children and sent hundreds of students to college. I typed back, "I would love to meet with you, Jenny. How about lunch on Thursday? There's a lovely cafe here in Sunset Gardens I think you'd enjoy." Her reply came almost instantly. "Perfect. I can't wait to hear the stories Dad says you have about helping kids who need it most." As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, a quiet realization settled over me. I was building new relationships now, ones grounded in mutual respect and shared values, not obligation and guilt. Malcolm had become more than a benefactor, he was a true friend. And Jenny would be the first of a new generation I might get to influence, not with money, but with hard-earned wisdom and a clear understanding of my own worth. That afternoon I had lunch with Mrs. Patterson, my next-door neighbor and one of my closest friends here. She was 82, sharp as a tack, and had raised 5 children mostly on her own after losing her husband young. "You know what I love about this place?" she said, slicing her salmon with careful precision. "Everyone here chose to be here. We're not here because our kids dumped us or because we were broke or because we had no options." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," she said, "we decided we deserve to live somewhere beautiful, with people who actually see us. We're here because we finally figured out that we matter." Her words hit something deep inside me. That was exactly what I'd been feeling but hadn't fully named. For the first time, I mattered. Not as a wallet, not as free childcare, not as a forever safety net, but as a person. "Mrs. Patterson," I said, "can I ask something personal?" "Honey, at my age everything's personal," she laughed. "Ask away." "Do you ever miss your old life? Even the hard parts?" She considered that, sipping her iced tea. "I miss the version of my children I thought I had," she said. "Took me years to realize the kids I believed I'd raised and the kids I actually raised were 2 different people." "How do you tell the difference?" I asked. "Easy," she replied with a wry smile, full of hard-earned wisdom. "The children you think you raised would move heaven and earth to make sure you're happy and safe. The children you actually raised only show up when they need something." That evening, I sat in my cozy living room, surrounded by shelves of books and pieces of art I'd finally allowed myself to buy, just because I liked them. On the coffee table sat Malcolm's old lunch card, the last one I'd ever given him. He'd insisted I keep it. I'd had it framed. But it reminded me, every time I looked at it, how far a single act of kindness can reach. I opened my laptop and began to type, "Dear David, Sarah, and Michael, thank you for your letter and for your concern about my well-being. I want you to know that I am happier and healthier than I have been in many years. My new home is beautiful, my financial situation is secure, and I have meaningful work that brings me joy every day. I understand that my choices may not be what you expected or hoped for, but they are mine to make. I am not in need of assistance, financial or otherwise, and I am not in danger of being manipulated or taken advantage of. I truly wish each of you happiness and success in your own lives. With love, Mom. P.S. I've enclosed some information about the Adrian Davis Foundation. In case you'd like to know more about the work I do. We are always looking for volunteers if any of you ever decide you'd like to help feed hungry children." I printed the letter, signed it, slipped it into an envelope along with one of the foundation brochures, and sealed it. Tomorrow I would mail it, and with that I'd be done justifying my life to people who had never tried to understand it. That night, as I got ready for bed, I stood at my window and looked out over the gardens that gave this community its name. Somewhere out there were dozens of people like me, people who had finally learned, late in life, what it felt like to be valued for who they were, not for what they could provide. I thought of the little boy Malcolm had been, hungry, alone, overlooked. Feeding him had fed something in me too, even back then. A sense of purpose I hadn't yet learned to name. I thought of the children now receiving meals, of the students whose scholarships would come from money I used to pour into my grown children's bad decisions. And most of all, I thought of the woman I had become at 64. Independent, respected, financially secure, surrounded by people who cared more about my mind than my wallet. It had taken a heart attack to rescue my heart, but for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. 6 months earlier, I had woken up from surgery, abandoned by the very people I had sacrificed everything for. Tonight, I was falling asleep in a home filled with real warmth and the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. Kindness, it turns out, has an incredibly long echo, and if you're very lucky, it finds its way back to you. Now I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me through this entire story. What would you do in my place? Have you ever experienced something even remotely similar? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to read your story. And while you're here, I've left 2 more of our channel's favorite stories on the final screen. They're powerful, emotional, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.